this is a good place to taper off.
You didn't want to jump?
I did not want to jump. I was a backstroker, and I was, I think, number 3 in the country at one point, and I was shipped out of not 1, but 2 Olympics, because after 36, they skipped 1940, and then they skipped 1944, so we didn't have Olympics for all those years. And by the time we did have Olympics, I was past my peak.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So did you join the Navy or were you drafted?
I was in a program at Yale called the V12, and it meant you could stay a little longer at college wearing a sailor's uniform, but going to classes. And that went on until midshipman school, which was at Plattsburgh, New York, and where there was June and winter. And that's where I graduated from midshipman school.
So was Navy the only option at Yale, or did you want to be in the Navy?
I wanted to be in the Navy.
Because you were a good swimmer?
Yes, I guess. And they came around one day in midshipman's class and handed us a flyer, and it was to choose your preference of duty. And one page, I remember, was the Atlantic, and the other page was the Pacific. And I thought, Atlantic, submarines, icebergs, torpedoes. Pacific, palm trees, hula girls, all the beauties. So I chose the Pacific.
Okay, so you went off to Coronado, California,
Yes.
and for frogman training. How long had the program been around at that time?
Well, I will run on here a bit because I was assigned to the amphibious base at Coronado. And every day I'd come back to the barracks and I'd see this grubby-looking little Quonset hut across the road on the beach. And I finally asked and was told that was very secret. That was frogmen. And so they said they're looking for swimmers. And so here I come. And I went across, and in 1 hour, they had my orders changed and put me in underwater demolition. And that's how I got it. And we went immediately overseas to Korea.
During your for more training, or they just put you into service?
No, we were in underwater demolition.
Right.
There was, I think, 9 men to a platoon. And several platoons that operated separately.
Well, what did they do during your training? What kind of things did you have to do during your
Well, well, the training was sort of, you were, oh, I don't know, you learned while you trained. And our purpose in being in Korea was actually, if the truth were known, to remove U.S. troops from the battlefront. And it meant going around to various potential beaches and looking them over and testing them and sampling any obstacles and all of that. So,
How dangerous was that?
well, you were constantly under enemy fire, potentially. I mean, and then finally, my outfit went on to Okinawa and had that major operation, which was really the end of the war.
So when did you actually start active duty? Like at what point in the war were you in active duty?
Oh, from the minute I got on the plane in Honolulu to,
Right, but what year, do you remember what year it was that you?
well, I would say 72, no.
Well, so you would, but you, how many years were you in active duty in the war? Do you remember?
In the Second World War
Yeah, in the
II?
Second World War, how many years were you in active duty?
Oh, I was on active duty one way or another about 18 years.
18 years.
Yeah,
And some of that obviously was during World War II,
yeah,
and then beyond that as well,
Korea,
in Korea.
yeah.
Right, okay. So, did you have to do much training with explosives?
Yes.
And what kind of training
We,
would
we
that-
got $50 a month bonus for handling explosives. We did.
And was that dangerous?
Oh, well, handling explosives is inherently dangerous.
Right.
But we learned all about the powers of the explosives and where to use them and how to use them. And the object was, if there were obstacles underwater, we were underwater people, and we were dropped off from a speedboat at intervals, and we swam in parallel, and we did maps of what was on the bottom. And when we went back to the ship, they translated the individual little maps, water maps, to paper, and they had a pretty good picture of what was down there.
Well, how did you map it? What was it? How did you map it? Like what was involved in that?
How did I mass it?
How did you map those explosives underwater?
Mask them?
No, map. How did you map them? You said you had to map and then they took it back and they made.
Oh,
How did you do that?
well, you got a little scratch pad that worked in the water, and you drew what you saw.
Really?
Yeah. And you took that back, and that was translated to a basic map.
So, what was more challenging for you? Was it more challenging Was it more challenging physically or was it more challenging mentally for you? What was a bigger challenge? Was it the challenge of the physical aspect of the work or the mental aspect?
Oh, I think the physical aspect, probably. The mental aspect was simply visual. I mean, you recorded as best you could what you saw. And there were Japanese obstacles put there, and there were reefs, and all these things you put down. And then when you went back, you were picked up at speed from the water with a man rowed in the powerboat, pulled alongside in a rubber boat, and he had a big, heavy noose. And as the boat approached, you got ready, and you grabbed the noose, and the force pulled you into the rubber boat, and then you got into the main boat. So retrieval was not all that hard. Sometimes they'd miss.
What happens when they miss?
I'd have to go back and get him. But we lost a couple people. I remember having to go and identify bodies. But we got our information back. And fortunately, I was never hit with a bullet. So.
What was it like to be in that sort of that first class of frogmen, serving?
Well, I was born to the water, and I always felt very at home, at ease in the water. I happen to have been born buoyant. I floated very well, whereas others had to swim just to stay on the surface. But I didn't, and so I was able to maneuver in the water quite freely.
You look like you have a swimmer's build.
Well, maybe so.
Yeah.
I'm 6'4", and it was a very small, intimate groups of people working. And you never knew where you were going until you went.
But you were serving in the Pacific versus the European area. So you chose the Pacific?
I did.
Yes. And the hula girls made a big difference there?
The what?
The hula girls?
Everything made me. I can remember the morning I got up and we were just offshore of Oahu, and I thought I could actually smell flowers, and I thought, so this is Hawaii. And I got a job in a bank there after the war, and worked there for several years.
So what did you have to do to prepare for a landing? What did you have to do?
Well, you studied given maps that were approximate. I mean, and you put the detail in by swimming in and looking. So the rest was performance, getting into the water at 30 miles an hour and getting out of the water at 30 miles an hour. But everything we did was underwater. And later on, they found that they needed inshore work. They needed, what's the matter?
No, I'm just checking to make sure that everything's running well.
Oh,
I once in a while I'll check it, just to make sure
Oh.
we're getting all this great information from you and that we're not missing anything on the cameras, that's all.
well, the Navy found that they needed ways to approach from above, not just underwater. And so they they started this outfit. What are the SEALs? And they operated from helicopters. And that that was past my day. We were told we were going to have to jump from towers and parachute down. I thought, well, this is a good place to taper off.
You didn't want to jump?
I did not want to jump. My brother went through special training group that jumped, and he loved it. But
You didn't take to the jumping?
I didn't see myself casting off into space.
Well, how like so you spent your time underwater, which you were
Yeah.
very comfortable underwater.
Yeah.
You know, how deep did you have to go underwater to do your job?
Oh, it varied down, well, say 20 feet. You could see pretty clear vision. I mean, the water was always clear, except in Incheon, it was muddy there. But most of the time it was clear water, and you could see down there and make your little scribbles. And we did lose a couple of men from, looked like farmers with guns firing down
Where would they fire from?
land,
Land?
their farms. Yeah.
So when you were underwater, you were looking for mainly explosives?
Obstacles,
Obstacles. And what kind of obstacles?
all kinds. There were these, what did they call them? Hedgehogs. Japanese built crosses of iron that would, the ends would reach up and stab a landing craft.
And sink it.
And, well, yeah, I could easily. Certainly it would impair its motion. And it was, but there were coral reefs where you wouldn't expect them to be. There were, and there was shoreline activity too. So I started off at Peleliu, which was one of the Santa Cruz Islands. And we did Peleliu, the landing, and a couple of our boats got sunken. And then we moved back and prepped and went on to Okinawa.
And what was Okinawa like?
Okinawa was a semi-tropical island, uh, very lush, uh, but it had been taken over by the Japanese, of course, and we ran but they made a false motion to land in the southern tip of Okinawa, and the real landing was up the coast on the east side. But they made this false landing, and our LCIs backed it up, and we picked up a couple of swimmers who got knocked off, and then we went up and got into the full-scale conflict of Okinawa.
Did you have many encounters with the Japanese?
Yes, the Kamikazes. See, that Okinawa was within fairly easy distance of the mainland Japanese, and they could take off from land airports and make it to Okinawa. Some didn't make it back, and I remember one. You remember little incidents. I remember we had a wire strung up from the overhead to the bow for laundry, and a kamikaze came out of the clouds. It was low, very humid, and turned on one wing and went right across that wire and crashed, of course. But so we scored one kamikaze, the victory for our boat.
But from the laundry line.
Yeah. These were pretty sturdy these LCIs were pretty sturdy boats, and they could carry personnel, landing craft infantry, or they could, in our case, carry stacked bombs, and the lower one would fire, and then the second one would drop down and fire. And each had the bursting power of about an 8-inch shell. And we went in first, ahead of the soldiers, and just swathed the land with shells, and then the boats came in through us and went on and landed. But
was it pretty terrifying seeing a kamikaze come at you?
yes, but it was so fast. It happened so fast that you were hardly aware that it was there, and it just had a wing over like this, and the thing went boom, like that, and so we scored it.
So you were on these boats that had these shells that would be fired on land. Now, did you personally have to carry weaponry?
No, I don't think so. I think the men on the team carried it. I don't remember.
Did you work in a team with other?
Yes.
And how many men were in your team?
9.
9 members of your team.
Yeah.
And how many survived of the 9? How many survived the war?
Oh, there were plenty of survivors. One thing we did not do was get killed.
That's great.
Yeah, it was. And the Okinawa operation was particularly deadly for the troops, but once again, we got through them.
So what would go through your mind before you started a mission? Like, was there any kind of process that you used, or did you have to prepare yourself mentally for doing a mission?
You know, it was like, well, what do I want to say? It was like an adventure to me, especially the South Pacific part. I mean, I just thought this is too glamorous for words, and it'd be another bang. But I didn't do much to prepare except what we had practiced, which was handling the ammunition. And once, much later at Wonsan, on the east coast of Korea, we blew up. It was the biggest charge we ever made. We blew up a whole dock, a whole landing area, and used this stuff called primacord.
What was that?
I don't know. It looked like clothesline,
Okay.
but it exploded at 26,000 feet per second or something, and you would tie one charge to another with primacord, and when you fired, it would all go off. And then there was another, they put some mines down, the Japanese, and we were assigned to clear them. And we had one very good swimmer who was captain of the Yale swimming team, a picture in there. He's dead now, just died a couple of years ago. And he was a really good diver. And he went down and released these chained bombs from their holdings, and the bomb floated to the surface, and there were special boats there to pick them up, and they just picked up these bombs and sent them back to Washington to be analyzed for whether it was Amatol or what they were using, you know. So, and that water was cold. Oh, God. So.
Yeah, wow. So, when the war came to an end,
Yes.
how did you, what was your reaction when you first learned that the Japanese had surrendered?
Well, after Okinawa, the LCIs lined up and went back to Pearl Harbor. And one day, I guess it was August, we heard that the Japanese had surrendered. Some of our people went back out and worked around through the Philippines. But I got shore duty at Pearl and never went out again in that perspective.
But you stayed in the Naval Reserves,
Yes.
and you were called back to active duty in the Korean War.
Yes, they said I stayed in the active reserve, and we went to monthly meetings, and one time they said, you are going to be called back, but if you volunteer back, you can pick your duty. Anywhere you want to go, we'll send you. So I thought, oh, Coronado is a great place. So I went back to the amphibious base at Coronado. One day, this Oldsmobile convertible with all the trim pulled into the parking lot at the BOQ, and there was Dick Lyon, captain of the Yale swimming team. And he said, what are you doing here? I said, well, there's a little outfit that you've got to join because they want swimmers. And I took him over and introduced him to the people that mattered, and they took him in, and he and I swam together on the team for the rest of the war.
In the Korean War? Or in the
Yeah,
Korean War?
yeah.
Wow. So, so you had mentioned, you know, we talked earlier about the SEAL program and jumping
Yeah.
out of things, and so, but your service as a frogman kind of like paved the way for that program in a sense. Don't you
It
think?
did, it did in a way, yes. I never jumped, and I mean, I was out of there while we were still called frogmen. And the SEAL thing came sea, air, and whatever it was that it stood for. And they did great work. I mean, after all, they killed that Indian that was such troublesome. And I fully admire them, but I was before them. You know, I think I'm the oldest frogman in the world.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. There was a guy that was 93, and he died last year, and that left me.
So you're the oldest surviving frogman
I
in
think
World War II. That's amazing.
I think so. Yeah.
Wow.
I'm 97, and I don't think anybody has made it that far.
So, what do you think, you know, I mean, obviously, my dad served in the Army
Yeah.
in World War II, but he was never in a like a capacity where he was in action. He was some sort of a clerk, I understand.
Yeah.
And my father-in-law was an airplane mechanic
Oh.
in World War II.
Yeah.
And I mean, I was born like right at the end of the Korean War pretty much, so, you know, I didn't really experience any of those things. But, my understanding of that time, you know, that people really, even in the States here, really got behind the soldiers, and it was really a united effort at that time.
Yeah.
So what are you most proud of about your work and your time there in World War II?
When word got out about frogmen and underwater demolition, the Navy sent over a tender young photographer to take pictures. And I had the duty, and they got me. And he said, he didn't know what he was doing. And he said, I said, well, why don't I get over on the sand dune and look like I'm watching for the enemy? And he said, oh, great idea. And so we did, and this very, I think my mother almost had a conniption fit when she got the Sunday paper, because I never knew about it. I mean, I went on overseas.
Why don't you hold that up for the cameras to see that?